Almost there. So we're going to talk about the end of trauma a little bit and why that's important. And we have a whole course called the End of Trauma course. And so this time is going to be a little Q&A time also. A little so bit. We can why talk about it. So welcome. Let's see. I think I'll mute this. There we go. Hey, welcome. All right. This is our time to talk about a little bit about the End of Trauma course. And the End of Trauma course is part of the End of Trauma initiative, really. And so just to mention also that in the End of Trauma course, this 9-week online course, we've run several rounds of this. And so I wanted to begin just with a more, kind of personal reflection of this to let people know, let you know how people are responding to the course. And it's just kind of humbling, actually, to be able to have the influence that you hope you can have. I've been training trauma therapists, for about 20 years, and have really dedicated myself to training therapists, like training the trainers, because I felt like I could magnify my effect and magnify this effect, especially in relationship to trauma and this understanding of trauma, actually, which is so biological, actually. And so this, first of all, this is really good news. The good news is you don't have a psychological problem. If you have trauma, you don't have a psychological problem. You have a physiological, a biological issue that is about the conditioning system that can be reconditioned, it can be changed. And I'm just looking at emails from people that describe this. And this is a 9-week online course, and you get it for a lifetime. So, and many people, because the course is just so deep and rich, are doing it again and again. And so here's what people are saying about this. Let's see. This is amazing. Being aware of how all this works, bringing orientation to the fore for healing, along with Steve's encouragement, just feels like I've got hope for turning this around now. As I told a friend yesterday, this course feels like my way out, and it's all so simple. You know when something is simple that you're onto something here, right? Let's see. I felt a profound shift with my ability to recognize the good inside and around me. I've been able to integrate this into my personal life and my work so seamlessly. It has felt so intuitive. I noticed that I leaned into the joy of each person, and because of that, more laughter and a deeper connection was felt. I also began to recognize when my body entered freeze, in terms of the trauma responses, the ones that are most immediate are meant to be short term. They're meant to come on and then go off, but our systems, our biology becomes disorganized when they last longer. That's part of what we work with in the course. And the phases of that are pretty well known. It's fight, flight, and freeze. So I began to recognize when my body entered freeze. I had a rather traumatic event happen, and I simply shut down. That's the idea. What was beautiful was that I actually noticed the change and became curious rather than fearful. Can you imagine, like being in a traumatic situation, a situation that could be really challenging, and instead of becoming fearful, I become curious. That changes things entirely. It changes things entirely. I've noticed that others around me have said things like, "You seem different," or "You seem lighter." I teach Fitzmaurice voice work and Shakespeare, and these channels have opened up myself and my students to new possibilities that I never could have foreseen. I deeply respect that it is a practice. I love that it encourages kindness and gentleness to ourselves and others around us. There are two moments in my artistic life that have fundamentally changed who I am: playing Hamlet and organic intelligence. Oh, that's so lovely. It's so lovely. let's see. I'll just do one more here to begin, just to begin to give you the flavor of what people are experiencing. Um, Instead of an underlying low level of anxiety, what that seems to be permeating everything, which has been there for a lot of my life, in the last few weeks, I've felt a growing sense of an underlying calm that seems to be permeating everything. This calm is accompanied by a growing sense of trust in myself and a growing sense of joy and meaning in my life. I feel like I am much more connected to the bigger picture and less stuck in day-to-day minutiae. I'm continually asking myself how I can find more ease, which is helping me work more strategically and have more energy for the things that matter. I'm a teacher and a coach, and I feel that the End of Trauma course has created such a meaningful shift in the way I approach my students. Right? So those are some of the things that people are saying. I might be able to come back to you with more. But I wanted to share this for you so that it could begin to inform also some of your questions. This is a Q&A time, so I'm going to open up the chat box and say hi and welcome. And invite you to bring your own comments and questions there. Why the end of trauma? That's the first thing. Why is this called the end of trauma? Because obviously the powers that be are busy making trauma faster than we can fix it. And the reason I'm bringing this idea forward is that we have a trauma safe initiative here at Organic Intelligence. And that trauma safe initiative is really asking therapists, traumatologists in the field to reconsider how directly and how explicitly to deal with trauma. Some people say, oh, the issue with trauma is denial. The other issue with trauma is that the use of trauma and the traumatic recall fails to appreciate what that recall does in the neurobiology. And it's also unnecessary. I should pull up a demonstration session for you. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that for you. But let me just describe it for you. Let me tell you why it's actually unnecessary to go through trauma. And I mean, for people who have been traumatized, I've worked with vets a good bit, and they come back and they say, "Oh man, I get so lit up when I go to those sessions because they're asking me to go through it. They're asking me about what part was the worst of it. They're asking me to journal about it, and this is a classic and empirically supported approach that's called an exposure protocol, and prolonged exposure in particular." And in that prolonged exposure protocol, the idea is that a person experiences it enough that it is somehow processed. But the reality is that there are a significant number of people for whom that is just way too intense. And part of the reason, I think, for the healing of or the positive results of this is that you just have a person who has an intense re-exposure to traumatic memories, and that puts them into more freeze. And you get a more chronic state of freeze, which means you have less reactivity to the trauma recall. You can actually dissociate and not have such a recall. But that's not trauma healing. That is actually greater disorientation and greater biological disorganization and disorientation. So we need to understand that there is a different way. And that different way includes being able to see how a system would on its own become self-organizing. And what I train people to do, and this is at first going to sound really just too good to be true, but the reality is that our bodies, our biology knows how to heal. It knows how to do everything that it needs to do. But our systems have been misled by psychology, by therapy, trying to find good resources for people, but where in fact the exposure to intense experience will actually be disorganizing. So instead, what we learn in organic intelligence and the end of trauma course is to begin to do something different. And that something different is to begin to understand how self-organization in the biology actually happens. And so part of the subtitle of this is complexity science. And so complexity science says that under the right conditions, our biology, your biology, my biology will be self-organizing, self-healing. All right, I mean, you get a cut and it heals, you eat food and it digests just fine. We don't have to do anything about that. But currently, the interventions that have people recalling all of that trauma is actually what begins to disorganize things. And so we take a view from our experience clinically and from complexity science that says our systems, everybody's systems, is operating in one of these three major phases. And complexity science has been used in many fields, from stock trading to engineering, road engineering, and so on. But for therapists, the important thing of this, and for each of us as human beings, the importance of this three-phase model is that we need to attune to our own system and to the system of our clients based on which phase the system is, which phase the system is in. Is it in chaos? Is it in a more resilient phase where it can actually take action? Or is it in a more prosilient phase where the system has already become self-organizing? Because what I do, how I attune, and what the needs are for a person of each of these systems are dramatically different. And so if you treat a prosilient system like a chaotic system, or if you teach a resilient system chaos tricks, it's not going to work. And so we have the need then to really recognize, is this system working in sort of the early developmental disturbance, the so-called attachment issues, where there is dramatic dissociation, which means more of the freeze system that is impacting the system and creating disorientation. And if so, that means a very particular kind of close attunement that's needed. I need to follow that person more. This isn't where I am leading as a therapist. Instead, I am following. I am following so well as to create a sense, a recognition of trust and good feeling. In phase two, it's different. In phase two, the system has come out of its freeze a bit by the interventions that I teach people to do in the heart training, that's the human empowerment resiliency training, but also the work that we do in the online course, the End of Trauma course. And we can make this move from chaos into resilience because every day you're getting the kind of feedback from a strategic video. And this video is doing like a guided meditation, but this meditation has as its, has behind it 20 years of experience of working with trauma and of training therapists and working with others to be able to help their brain reset and rewire. And that resetting and rewiring is really necessary today because, not only is the world problematic, but there is a very simple and direct scientific understanding for why our systems are so out of sync. And the reason for that has to do with what's called negative reinforcement, or if you've read, say, Rick Hanson's Buddha's Brain, you've heard about the negativity bias. And the negativity bias, or this negative reinforcement, is something that I call in organic intelligence, I call this the what's wrong attention, because our attention is constantly and unconsciously drawn to what's wrong or the problem. And that unconscious drawing to the problem means that my attention is unavailable to receive the signals from my own biology that would support my self-healing. And in the End of Trauma course, we learn and train ourselves to trend our attention back into the direction where things can really help, which is not what's wrong all the time, but what the biology is bringing and what help the system is bringing. For instance, I'm sitting here right now like this, and this is something I do a lot. As I sit here, I'm just sort of hanging out, and every now and then, as I'm thinking, there'll be this little movement right here is actually a very tender contact that feels and can feel quite caring. But if I'm going, oh, now what's my problem? What am I going to do about this? I miss this completely. So in the End of Trauma course, we practice several things. One is we get those daily SUPs. They're called the Strategic Use of Perception Practices. And I've recorded one for everybody for every day. So you look in your inbox and there's an email that says, hey, you've got new content available. You've got a new video waiting for you. And then you go and you listen. It's just a 10-minute video. And you can download it onto your phone. You can listen to it on the way to work, and it simply gives you the experience of certain states, and it gives you the internal experience that helps the brain rewire itself away from what's wrong into what's here and now, how to be present. And so with those videos, we begin to combat really the what's wrong attention. And that what's wrong attention and the science behind that is simply negative reinforcement. And it's important enough, it's so vital, I think, that I actually want to take a few minutes to tell you what negative reinforcement is. Negative reinforcement is usually thought of as like punishment, like spanking or something like that, but it's really not. Negative reinforcement was discovered back in the laboratory of the early days of behaviorism in the laboratory of Watson, and they had rats there, and they would bring a rat and they would put the rat into the cage, and this cage had metal floors, and the metal floors then would receive a subtle electrical current that would not feel good to the rat who was in the cage. And so the rat would scurry around and it would accidentally bump into the switch that would turn off the electricity. And then the rat was brought back in, and then the electricity was turned on. So again, that subtle electrical current, and the rat would scurry around and again, accidentally bump into the switch that would go, turn off the electricity. Over time, the rat would sort of go, hey, I noticed that it feels better. It seems to feel better sooner over in this area. And it begins to go over to where that switch is sooner and sooner and sooner, until eventually the rat runs into the cage, turns off the electricity just like that. And that's negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement means you turn off. That's what happens when you turn off something that doesn't feel good. So it's the cessation or the stopping of an aversive experience. So the thing that then we want to think about then is that's therapy. That's therapy, and it creates this really damning conditioning experience, which is the way to feel better is by feeling worse first. The way to feel better is by feeling worse first. That's negative reinforcement, and it creates this habit. It's the addiction pattern. That's why it's so effective with addictive process. And many of the therapists that I've trained are working in famous addiction centers like the Meadows, Sierra Tucson, and so on. And so we want to be able to understand this addiction in terms of negative reinforcement, which is it feels better after it feels worse first. Now, to get a biology shifted out of that takes quite some time. That biology, that conditioning is a deep conditioning, and it is ongoingly reinforced. So for us to be able to have a different conditioning is going to take some time and repeated and incremental effort. And that's what the End of Trauma course is about. You get every day, you get those recordings that provide that different feedback that eventually can trend your system to anticipating and looking toward positive reinforcement. That's not the end. That's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. To get the results that you were hearing about here, that's going to take a little work. Right? So there's more to this than meets the eye. So just want to say also welcome to you, some of my friends here, Megan, Mashid, and others. Nice you could join us. And to just say also, this negative reinforcement is so problematic because it then teaches the way to feel better is by feeling worse first. And when you go into therapy, and if you go into trauma therapy, that's the first question basically is, oh, what would you like to work on today? Or what's the problem? And it is that focus on the problem that really causes the system disorganization. The discovery that I made in years of teaching trauma is this, which is that there are these various channels that our systems want to send us helpful, positive information, but I am focused on what's wrong and I miss it. So these channels, this graphic stands for image, sensation, orientation, meaning, and affect. And we are learning relationship. I am learning my relationship to each of these: image, sensation, orientation, meaning, and affect. And we are learning that the system, your biology, has a goal. It has a major goal in mind. And that goal is don't die, right? This is it. The survival instinct says don't die. Well, for the biology, from a systems perspective, the biology saying don't die means don't fall apart, don't disintegrate. We are a system. Basically, we're a system of systems. We're an ecosystem of systems even. That is, we exist and we function and we are an organism because of the understanding now about biological synchrony. And for instance, your heart's pacemaker is 10,000 cells. And those 10,000 cells are all ticking. They're oscillators. And they're all ticking. And the miracle that makes our existence possible and biological life possible is that there is this innate understanding, there is this innate program by which those 10,000 cells begin to tick together. They tick together. And when they tick together, we're doing well. And if those 10,000 cells that cause the beating of your heart stop ticking together or they disorganize, then that could be a mortal failure, right? So the first rule of the biology is don't change. Don't change. So, this is really important because every self-help group, every therapy says, we'll help you change. We'll help you be better, stronger, faster, more emotionally intelligent, better in relationship, feeling better, less depressed, less anxious, all that. And they say, we're going to help you change. Well, if you really want to help a system change and change deeply, then support its need not to change. Support its stability first, right? Support the system to consolidate, to be strong, and to really do what it knows to do to stay safe and stable. So our End of Trauma initiative is exactly that. It's a trauma-safe initiative that says we can understand, by understanding this three-phase model, we can understand what a system needs and can do in order to learn, grow, and grow itself in the sense of safety and stability. Safety and stability. And that means, in particular, that working with trauma may not, and likely is not, the way to begin. and is not the way to really set things up. Instead, we're going to be looking toward phase 2, initial conditions that will help the system begin to stabilize after you get the system out of its chaos, which is phase 1. Okay. And part of the tools that we learn in the end of trauma course is that we will go week by week, helping our system look for the supportive information that comes from our biology. Because as well as, well, let me back up just a sec, because each of these channels, our image channel and our sensation channel, our orientation channel where we're connecting to the environment through the senses, the meaning channel, our cognitions and our emotions, these channels are going to, by and large, be sending one message: stay the same, stay stuck, don't change, stay stable. And so for me to change and grow, I have to find stability, but then I have to ignore the messaging from most of these channels that says, just stay the same. And I'll send you information that's too hot, too intense, that'll make you feel worse before you feel better, because that will keep you stuck. So instead, in the end of trauma course, we train ourselves in each of these channels. We have a full week on each of these channels, and then we have a week on the integration among these channels. And we begin to train ourselves to see the information that comes from your biology right there for you, because the rest of the channels are probably going to be dangling this red herring that says there's something fishy going on here. What's wrong? And it draws the attention into what's wrong, and then we take our eye off the ball. We miss the signal from our very own biology that would be helpful. And I demonstrated one of those, like in sensation, it could be this. In thought, it could be something else. And in emotion, there could be an emotion. So we learn and we practice each of these. And so I have trained in all of these channels in particular. You know, and every therapeutic tradition says, oh, it's one of these channels that's more important than the other. So I trained for a while in an approach that said, oh, you've got to pay attention to sensation, that it's about the sensation experience. So you take a trauma and then you feel a little bit of it in sensation, and that's what's supposed to be healing. And truth is, sometimes that works, but not always, because the sensation channel, like all the others, is just as likely to be sending a signal that's going to be too much, too fast, too intense, and will serve the system purposes of just staying the same and staying stable. And so that's really so we've got, want to say again hello to the people on Facebook here. But we need to change the orientation a little bit so it's not sideways. All right, thank you, Amber. Thank you for that. Would you mind to here we go. Now I think we're in business. All right. So to then look through each of these channels so that we can discard the information that's not relevant and to listen to the channel that is relevant. And again, I have spent enough time in all of these channels, trained in all of these. So the sensation channel for sure. In the image channel, there are traditions, say, of eidetic imagery, hypnosis, and others that train you, and meditation as well, that train you to use the image channel. And we work in that channel quite a bit, and I have the background to work in that. The meaning channel also, to learn about one's relationship to cognitive process. So having studied cognitive psychology, behaviorism, and also the meditative background that helps one learn relationship to thinking rather than attached thinking or losing track of where one is by being lost in thought. Or the affect channel, learning the signs of emotion, learning the language of emotion. And since I was trained as a therapist, then also that channel is very familiar. but it takes all of them. We're going to have to learn the relationship between all of them, and we want to learn our connection in all of those channels so that then I can pay attention to which channel is coming and which channel has the best information for me. The channel that would be self-organizing, if I could be paying attention to it. All right, are we beginning to make sense here? And what we do in the end of trauma course is that we look every week at that, and then we look at the ways that we're plugging the energetic leaks, like where emotion is off the chain and how to dampen that, how to plug that leak of being overly upset, of ways to be able to either move to another channel, to find the support that is in that same channel, like the affect channel. We learn tricks and tools and tips. And we have then webinars where I'm talking about each of those channels, and we'll explain each of those channels in sequence: the image, sensation, orientation, meaning, and affect channel. So that's a really complete process, and most people that are in the end of trauma course are repeating the course because there's so much. You get it for a lifetime. There's a money back guarantee, so there's really no risk about it. And while we're here, I want to give you an experience also of this important other channel, which is the orientation channel. And again, when I was teaching in the somatic field, I brought in this notion of orientation as connecting to the environment through the senses. Back in the day, it was just sensation, 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 and that was true in the somatic area I was working with, but also in the Aikido training that I did, a lot of sensation awareness, and also in the meditation tradition, really beginning with body awareness. And we do, for instance, in the end of trauma course, you do get body scan exercises. But it's specifically tailored to the use of sensation awareness in a way that's not going to be too much. We're going to avoid that going over threshold, that doing too much, so that we get out of that negative reinforcement trap and come back into the positive reinforcement framework. So we look at, in particular, at orientation, and I want to share an experience of that with you, just to share an experience so that you can have a little feel for how all of our interventions are tuned to the way the neurobiology wants to come back into stability, stabilization, and really like a firm sense of foundation in grounding. Let's begin this way. Nothing you're going to need to do on this. We're going to, hey Gary, how's Maine treating you? Michelle, nice to see you also. Been a while since we've talked. And so let's do this. Let's do just an orientation exercise. You know, in therapy and in our mindfulness traditions and meditation, the emphasis is on the internal experience, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, on the other hand, the over-examined life is not living either, right? And so really, for the biology to be secure, it has to be well mapped in its environment. In other words, if you're a mindfulness practitioner, for instance, what mindfulness we have if I'm not somehow conscious of my physical environment? So we begin at this very basic level, and that we call upon the theories of the polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges in this, because we use orientation as a way to prime for what is called that ventral vagal support, a major sort of avenue of the nervous system to become much more modulated, we'll say. Let's begin with an exercise. Here, you won't need a pen or paper for this. This is being recorded, so no need to fret. We'll get it up. It'll be on YouTube also. It's recording here. So no need to have to take notes. Let's just do an exercise together. And maybe it'll be surprising to you what comes. And I'll ask you at the end of this, maybe type in your experience of it. Okay, you ready? Here's what to do. First of all, nothing. Let's start by the easy way. Let's not do much at all, except this. Just see if you can let your eyes go where they want to go. to let your eyes go where they want to go. And just let them roam around where you are and let them just see what you can see and see where your eyes get attracted. Just see what you see when you see what you see. And just notice what you see. Let's stay in the seeing channel as much as you can. It's normal. Thoughts come, oh, I like that, or other thoughts like, oh, what is this about? Whatever. Just let those come and then go back to the seeing channel. Stay in the seeing channel if you can. And then a question. Question I'd like to bring to you, and you can bring it into the chat box here. What's different now in how you feel versus before? Anything that you notice that's different? I'd be interested to hear from you. What changed? Anything, any shift that you noticed? This is a meditation on more relaxed. Thanks, Suzanne. More relaxed. And that's really something like that. I'm like feeling more relaxed. Anything else? Anybody else like to share a little bit in here? Pleasantly here. Oh, how lovely is that? Catherine, I suspect you have some experience with this. All right. So more relaxed, pleasantly here. And most people find this, and you can do this kind of exercise anywhere, but there are several reasons why such a seemingly simple exercise is powerful enough to have us feel lighter and more playful. Hey, Natasha. Hey. Thanks also for your endorsements for us and words. Thank you. Super kind, super generous. Some of the reasons why this is so important. Orientation is connecting to the environment through the senses. And for my brain to really feel safe, I have to map myself in this environment. I have to have a sense of where the escape avenues are, for sure, what's in the environment, because if I need to, my brain needs to create a plan of fight or flight or freeze, then knowing how to execute that plan in this environment is really necessary, right? So I know where the exits are, I know where the hiding places are, I know where the resources are, right? All of that. And this does another thing. It not only helps us map ourselves in the environment, but it does this other thing, which is it gives me a sense of myself in an important role. And that role that's going to be so important for us as we go through the work of organic intelligence is myself as observer. In psychology, we call this observing ego or ego strengthening. I am able to observe things in the environment. And eventually, I will take that observational ability of things in the environment and point them back to myself. That is, I'll be able to observe the images that are going on all the time. I'll be able to observe the sensation. I'll be able to observe the thoughts. I'll be able to observe the emotions without becoming so identified with them. Right? The End of Trauma course really is a primer in non-duality. When you move from phase 1 to phase 2, you begin to get resilient. And once you begin to move into phase 3, it is self-organizing, and there is a quality then of being as I am letting go of control. At first, I have to gain back control. If my system is wonky and I'm uncomfortable, I'm unhappy, I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I am lonely, right? And I have to be able to come out of that by working with these phases of fight, flight, and freeze, and come out of that and build back a sense of confidence that I have some control over how I feel. And I have some sense of self-regulation in that. And I do the things that I need to do to get that kind of self-regulation. That can include different therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, nonviolent communication tools. The ability to focus attention is another key. Medications can be helpful from time to time to bring that stabilization. And once I begin to get that sense of reliable control and ego strength, then I began to really work these initial conditions, the first one of which we just did, that orientation. There are others that I'll talk about that are equally important. But for now, I just want to mention that when you get these conditions online, then the biology recognizes, oh, this is what I need. These are the conditions. This is like the seed that's lying dormant, waiting for the right warmth and environment and moisture to then begin that enzymatic and archetypic practice of growing and emerging. And when that happens, we move into phase 3, where we are letting go of control and where there is a deep self-regulation and a self-organizing system. And toward the latter part of this, as we shift into the latter phases of phase 3, we have a sense of even letting go of self, letting go of self and self-other distinction. We are having a much larger experience that is available. And most people would call that a deeper spiritual experience. And that is part of the trajectory. That is also the legacy and the promise of our own biology. All of the tools that are being shared have value. So for instance, I may use discharge models here in phase 1, and I'm going to begin to coach people as they enter into phase 2 in resilience around what's really going to help, and get these initial conditions online so that you give the biology a chance to recognize the right conditions for that alchemy of the growth of being, really. And that's what we're about. Okay, so those are some of the dimensions. How does our biology bind and associate with thoughts and self-identity? Kevin, I think it has to do with dissociation, frankly. We get a sense of thought and self-identity because I abstract, I separate myself from myself. And that's natural. We begin with that. As we begin to do the work of, say, meditation, I am looking at experience. Maybe I'm looking at sensation. I'm doing a body scan and I'm sensing the elbow. But it's me looking from here down at the elbow. I am somehow separate or away from it. What happens as we move toward phase 3 is that the elbow is conscious. That is, there is a mapping, there is a consciousness of all of that that's there. And so there is no, in a sense, need for identity at that point, because it's all emerging in the here and now on an ongoing basis, right? That's the movement, and that's the quality of the flavor of phase 3. That also means that I begin to have a perspective or relationship to, say, thoughts, especially those repeated thoughts that create really the states that get me sort of stuck, and by the same token, stable. And what we find those actually are, Kevin, are combinations and interactions. They form like stable interactions. So I have here a thought that says, gosh, I wonder if I'm going to freak out. And then as I say that, I'm noticing, oh, I am kind of anxious. And then there is this sensation like, oh, my throat is a little tight. And then it's like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to get enough breath. And then I'm even more anxious. And then a sensation, right? And there is just that ASM, that meaning, affect, sensation, rotation that happens. And what we learn in the end of trauma course is how those configurations create the states that keep me stuck, keep me stable, keep me the same, keep me from evolving. And I can begin to learn to recognize those patterns and not take them so seriously, especially once I've done this process of disidentifying from those and really begun to learn more about orientation and keeping the attention in the here and now. Cece is one of our beloved mentors in the trainings. We're having a heart training. We had our heart training, the 4th heart training here in San Diego this past week. And tomorrow we'll go to Tucson, where I'll see Cece. Cece says, orientation is the beginning of the call and response of our living being, joy, and meaning. Let me just say that again. It's so poetic. Orientation. And orientation is connecting to the environment through the senses, right? It's giving the brain a chance to be in the here and now rather than spun out on something in the past. Cece says, orientation is the beginning of the call and response of our living being, joy, and meaning. The call and response of our living being, joy, and meaning. Right? And that's a really important consideration. Thank you, Cece. Yeah, Tiffany, it is beautiful, because that call and response is, I see the sunset, and when I see that sunset, I have an interior experience. So we're saying it's connecting to the environment through the senses, but it means really this interface between the external environment and the internal. That is, there is ultimately then the union between those things. And it means in part that my attention is not so withdrawn to my interior experience. When the interior experience is charged and heading toward negative reinforcement, it's charged there because of the intensity of the internal experience, especially around survival processes, fight, flight, and freeze, that are aiming to go too intensely and thus reinforce the status quo. Right? That's the what's wrong attention, how that gets repeated. There's a question here. It says, if I'm ready to start the heart training, do you still recommend starting with the end of trauma course? Yeah, I do, actually. I do, because that the heart training really builds on some of the main notions that we talk about in the end of trauma course. In particular, is part of this notion that we call outsight, which is where, in psychology, we talk about projection. Okay, so I'm projecting, and Freud's notion there was that there's something about myself that I find unacceptable, unintegratable, and so I project it out there because I can't handle it here. One of those examples, is called projective identification, for instance. So we project things out there, and I see them out there, and then it's not inside of me. If for instance I'm paranoid and I'm really fearful that the FBI is listening in and has bugged the room and so on, it's that I feel a level of fear that I'm trying somehow to explain to myself. That fear may go back to my early attachment situation, not feeling safe at home. It could be dad is an alcoholic or violent. I mean, it could be anything, right? And so that fear, though, keeps going. And in order for me to feel better, I've got to attach it to something. So I make up something to be afraid of. And in terms of the FBI listening in, it's always good to remember that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not listening in. Just saying. But the point is to be able to not be concerned by the external environment, but instead feed myself to the sensations, the senses, getting the information from the senses. It's called coming back to the senses, orientation, coming back to the senses. And I can do something different if I understand projection differently, and that's outsight. And we practice this outsight in the heart training, but we learn about it also in the end of trauma course, which is, Freud said we're always projecting out that which we find unacceptable. D.H. Lawrence critiqued the Freudian perspective. And D.H. Lawrence said, the Freudian unconscious is the cellar in which the mind keeps its bastard spawn. Right? The D.H. Lawrence, the Freudian unconscious is the cellar in which the mind keeps its bastard spawn. So the stuff we don't like, stuff we can't deal with, stuff that's unpleasant, I'm just going to stuff it down into the unconscious. I'm going to repress it, suppress it, project it out, deny it, all of that sort of stuff. However, what I discovered is that even more important than that which is unpleasantly tucked away is that which is unconscious, that is here for help. right? What I'm telling you in terms of these I-SOMA channels is that we are unconscious of the help that is often literally at our fingertips. I was doing a session today and somebody was talking about something stressful, and right here was this movement. It was just this, just this. This is the biology knocking at the door saying, hello, hello, there's something else here. I have some good news for you. Listen to this. It's not the tiny violin of faux empathy. It is love. It is care. It is self-regulation in the deepest sense. And this is just one example of sensation. In the sensation channel, we have image, sensation, orientation, meaning, affect. We have all of these channels, and they all, at one point or another, are going to be sending you signals of support. And if we can get our mind off of what's wrong, we can actually receive this signal, let the biology do what it knows to do, and then begin to feel better. Hey, Happy Ron, good to see you. All right. This is part of the genius of our organism, which is that there are always signals coming through that are supportive. And the intensities that we are working with are just way too high. Like trauma. By the time let me show you one more scale. And Kevin, I'm going to come back to your comment there. This is the map for the heart training, and the map from Organic Intelligence about how to work, basically. But that means that we are working really this implicit level first. We are working really in the areas that are easy to work with. Right? The explicit content comes much later. We don't get to the explicit content until there's been built this foundation, except for when you're working phase one. Phase one, any port in a storm, you're going right with the client wherever they are. But to be able then to learn one's relationship to threshold is really key. So this is the key for the understanding that I wanted to bring to you here, and what you'll get for sure in the End of Trauma course, and then what we make a practice of in the heart training, which is that the system will organize when the intensity rises, not through what's wrong, but through what feels interesting, exciting, curious, when the arousal is positive, not negative. If you ask a person, oh, what's the traumatic event? These arousal cycles are going to be way too high, and they're going to be negative, and you're going to get negative reinforcement. You may get discharge, may feel better, your symptoms may go away, but your system will not necessarily reorganize. And so we work at these really low levels, and the low levels are established once we are able to find our way through these initial conditions. These initial conditions are orientation, that priming for the ventral vagal system, and then orientation to pleasure, healthy, non-addictive pleasure. And then when we do that, the intensity of all of our experience begins to shift over into positive excitement, positive relaxation, positive excitement, positive relaxation. And that level is the ideal intensity where the system becomes self-organizing. And what I train people to do in the heart training is to recognize where that level is and how to get there through positive reinforcement, and how to shift out of the negative reinforcement and get into the positive reinforcement frame, where we grow our capacity to experience intensity, but without challenge, without undue challenge. Let me show you one. I'll screen share my. One other thing about this question of the heart training versus the End of Trauma course. The End of Trauma course gives you the internal experience, and when you get that internal experience, you can also use sessions better. I have a whole cadre of folks that are trained to see your system in its self-organizational phase and to be able to catalyze that self-organization so you go into phase 3. If you do the end of trauma course, you're able to use those sessions and catapult yourself into that work that catalyzes phase 3 much more rapidly. So there are so many advantages to doing that end of trauma course. And the immediate advantage is people start feeling better right away. So if feeling better is better, get in there and have yourself an experience of feeling better from the biology on up. That's where it really matters. So Kevin, my daughter's starting PhD in psychology. How long before her schooling catches up to what EOT is informing us already today? It's happening. I'm on the faculty and adjunct faculty at JFK University, and everywhere I go and teach, this just makes sense to people, and people are talking about this, talking about complexity science. I've been doing this for 20 years, and so there is a really advanced clinical protocol to all of this, and thankfully also positive psychology is coming in and bringing in the emphasis on positive reinforcement. But there's a very particular approach that you have to understand in relationship to all of the ways that our system can be self-organizing. So I'll be teaching some of my advanced students more about this and complexity science. But in the meantime, I want to get now really these tools. I mentioned that I really began by working and training therapists. And the reason for that was because those of you who trained with me and are therapists, helpers, coaches, you're then going out and helping more people. So I can help more people by training the trainers, training the coaches, training the therapists. And I'm continuing to do that. But now with the end of trauma course, I can reach out directly to people and have a wider reach because it's an online course. So I'm doing a weekly webinar and I'm doing weekly coaching with people that are in the course. And then you have all of these online resources, and the resources include that daily sup. So if you get into the end of trauma course, then just focus on that. It's a 10-minute thing. Let me share my screen and show you a little bit of what's waiting for you here in the end of trauma course. Let's see. End of trauma course. Oh, this is a free course that we offer. Head over to organicintelligence.org, and then you can join the clinical mindfulness. It's free, and it's the relationship between organic intelligence and mindfulness, and these different clinical approaches: psychotherapy, midwifery, work with children and parents. There is a more formal explication on Buddhism. From Brent Morton, a mindfulness teacher, and then we're going to look at nonviolent communication and so on. So if you go to our website, and you'll see the end of trauma happening here, and then you can register for this, also clinical mindfulness. But the end of trauma 9-week course has all of these different aspects. Look at this, all of these weeks, 9 weeks of working in each of these channels. So the first week is overview, then you get image. The image channel is so important to work with because in order to work with freeze, you have to work with image. And it's that freeze that really creates that first disorganization of phase 1 chaos. That's due to freezy business, the freeze response, in particular in conflict with sympathetic arousal, fight and flight. So if you learn to work with image, you will get the tools to be able to work well with image, and you get the tools not only that are the information about working with image, but also the strategic use of perception. This one is 11 minutes, and for 11 minutes you just turn this on, or you can also download it here and then take it with you, and then we just do this guided experience that it takes you through the imagination journey, the work with image, and the ways that it supports your biology to self-organize. And that's our jam. Right? There are also the information videos that are available, and totally legit to check on those. I'm talking about these informational videos, these bits of information. Let's check this out. Image
this week, this is Image Week. We are going to be looking at successively in our weeks together. We're going to look at ways that we can prime for support and blues, so we can prime for the attentional control. We're trying to gain control and rest that habit of the red vortex, you know, the red troll waiting for our attention. We're trying to exercise our attention into what feels better. We saw in week 1, better is better. And the reason better is better is because I need to develop attentional control. I needed to develop the control over where my attention is. And I need to recognize what attention is. So feeling better is better. And I'm going to try to gain control in I-SOMA channels. These are all the channels of our experience, so that we can feel better on an ongoing basis and then build the foundation. Then that will create a state in which our return to wholeness can happen. This is the Image Week. Image is this fantastic property that we have. If you have studied anything that is related to meditation, there are deep traditions of meditation that look at image work and really create and support our states of greater wholesomeness and positivity through the use of image.
Okay, so that's an info video, and you get those every day, and then you're able to listen and learn about the nature of, say, image and sensation and orientation, meaning and affect, and then you get the actual experience of it. So every week you're getting the experience of that, likewise with the strategic use of perception practice that you can take with you. And then there's the workbook. It's over 200 pages of exercises and more background and context on the way that your neurobiology wants to self-organize. And there's morning exercises you can do and evening exercises you can do. So there's a massive amount of resources, the webinar and so on, and just an amazing set of resources. And that's why people are doing it over and over again, because you get something different each time, in part because we are different each time. We are changed by the experience of the course, and then we are different and we see things differently. So yeah, thank you. I think you're going to give us an example of a sub. Great, thanks, okay. Cece says, strategic use of perception is different than traditional guided imagery because it is specifically designed to support the evolution of self-organization. That's right. So those strategic use of perception practices is different than traditional guided imagery or guided meditation because it's specifically designed to support the evolution of self-organization. And it's called the strategic use of perception. So I'm directing attention in strategic ways that help my system organize. Okay, thanks, Cece. Thanks for naming that. Thanks for your support. All right, so those are some of the things that I wanted to share with you. And just let me take a moment to see if you have any questions as well. Maybe there's something else that that you have in mind to speak to. Yeah, feel free to come in with a question. I'll do one more share here because there is also the Facebook group that we have, and in the Facebook group we get these reminders. In the workbook, you get these really lush images with these reminders like, you can discover more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. Right? And then we're talking about these. People in the class are chatting about these. We have moderators that have trained with me for years and years. And how about this? Our biggest resistance is not to discomfort. Our biggest resistance is to joy, that which otherwise would transform us. Yeah, that's a mind-boggling koan if you think about it. That what we're actually resisting and what our limit is the limitation to joy. So this invitation that I'm making for you here to the End of Trauma course is the invitation to grow your biology naturally, to engage in a community of support, and to do that because the end point is joy. And it's joy because that is our nature. And when our nature emerges, something else happens. We become kinder, we become more caring, we become more responsible. So again, my aim here in organic intelligence is to really help us come to some way of supporting the life on the planet. Let me take just a second with, hey, Jesus, nice to see you. I'll see you in Tucson, maybe, right? Here's our mission statement in organic intelligence. How does this sound to you? How does this sound? Empowering compassion. Our mission is to mentor, empower, train, and collaborate. Organic intelligence invokes the natural, largely untapped capacity for healing, virtue, and improved performance. The resulting emergence of kindness, wisdom, and insight guides our members toward caring for all life on the planet. Right? Our capacity for healing, virtue, and improved performance. This is an ethical dimension here. This is caring for life on the planet, caring for ourselves so that we can then care for others. And that's why to do the end of trauma course first. The heart training is also a great value, and you can do them simultaneously as well. And in fact, by taking the end of trauma course, you get a coupon worth $500 off your heart training. So if for those that are newly enrolling in the heart training, you can get a really sizable discount, $500 off on the heart training. We want to encourage and incentivize you to deepen in this understanding, frankly, because the world needs your support. And that's the name of our game. I think we have one more question. Brian, when's the next San Diego Heart cohort starting? We're going to start organizing that in January. So I would think probably looking at the fall of 2020, something like that. You can start this month in Minnesota, however. In the clinical mindfulness course, our first teacher there was Robin Craig. And Robin Craig has studied physiology, has studied with me for years and years, and is a mindfulness teacher herself, and is co-teaching there in Minneapolis, the heart training with Amy Summers. Amy Summers was another guest on the clinical mindfulness course, is an expert in working with children and families and parents. So if you want to get into the heart training, that one's coming up in October. That's coming up in just shortly. So check that out. That's on our website, organicintelligence.org. And the heart training will start in Minnesota. And then we'll be in San Diego coming up probably in the fall of 2020. Also, Tucson will be coming. And who knows, maybe we should, Kitty, maybe we should come back to Hawaii. What do you think about that? How about that? That might be a nice place to go. All right, thank you so much for participating. Thank you for being a part of this. We're Organic Intelligence. I'm Steve Hoskinson. The End of Trauma course, you can register for that. You can get involved in that. We may be able to find a link right here in the chat for the End of Trauma course. It's on organicintelligence.org. Aloha to all of us. That's our spirit for sure. And thank you. Yeah, if you have any questions, our email here is EOTC, and I'll type this in at organicintelligence.org. That's our email, and that EOTC is End of Trauma course. So feel free to participate and come in to the End of Trauma course. You can find the End of Trauma course there. There's a link down in the chat box, and feel free to explore that. Give me a call, be in touch, email. Be happy to talk with you about that course. All right, thanks again, and I look forward to our next meeting. Yeah, CC, it'll be soon, won't it? All right, be well, y'all. Take care.